Say dog, I'm sure a picture comes to your mind. Many people will picture some sort of common purebred dog, such as a golden retriever, lab, or poodle. However, not many people know how we got these dogs from the ancient wild gray wolves. Today, I'm going to show you the process from the earliest of domestication of these animals, the grouping into specific breeds, and eventually our modern breeding practices. First, we're going to look at the earliest of domestication. This lovable man's best friend was not always so cute and cuddly. Humans originally befriended gray wolves, which they domesticated into the dogs we see today. There's a lot of disagreement over when this first happened. However, it is generally believed by scientists that it was about 15 to 50,000 years ago. Although we often see dogs as a companion animal today, they were originally bred for symbiotic relationship with humans. Psychology Today author Julianne Brewer, the head of the Dog Science Lab at Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History, believes that dogs were originally domesticated for hunting, as hunting partners, cleanup, heat, meat, and transportation. There is also a highly debated theory, which is that of double domestication. In an article by The Atlantic, they shared that John Bradley believes that different groups across Eurasia began domesticating dogs at the same time, entirely separate from one another. He was able to find the petraeus bone of an ancient dog, and that had enough DNA information to sequence an entire genome. From this information, his team was able to conclude that domestication happened in the East while it was also happening in the West. And then about the Bronze Age, the dogs from the East traveled west and bred and mated with the dogs in the West. And this idea is further supported by the fact that we do not have a gradient of bones from the center of domestication outwards. The Atlantic shares that 15,000-year-old dog fossils were found in Western Europe, 12,500-year-old ones in East Asia, and nothing older than 8,000 years in between. This means that the oldest dog fossils were entirely separate until thousands of years later. Now that we have these domesticated dogs, we began to split them into specific breeds that we have today. Once dogs were domesticated, we began breeding for specific traits. The AKC says it is no accident that we have dogs able to hunt, herd, guard, track, and do so many other things at an expert level. Humans figured out early on that if you breed dogs that were good at these things, you would get offspring that were also good at doing them. This was the first step in the separation into specific species, as humans began breeding different lines for different purposes. The Morris Animal Foundation shares that when researchers looked into the genetics of different popular herding breeds, they found they each came from different places. Then they looked further and found that they all had different methods for herding, which is because they were bred by different people in different locations, even though they were bred for a similar purpose. In an article by Science.com, they shared that shortly after domestication began, people began to pick dogs for specific skills. They also shared the research by Elaine Ostender and Heidi Parker, geneticists at the National Human Genome Research Institute. They were able to create a family tree which included 23 clades, which grouped dogs based off genetics. However, it also generally showed groupings that represented traits as well. Over the past 200 years, these clades have been refined into much more specific dog breeds. The Morris Animal Foundation describes this boom in breeding for conformational traits as the Victorian explosion. This was something that happened about 150 years ago in Great Britain. This was when the Victorian people were very inspired by the work of Darwin and began taking him as an inspiration into their own breeding practices. However, we did not stop changing our breeding practices once we got these refined dog breeds. We have continued to change even today. It is very clear that the dogs we have today are very different from their ancestors, not only in appearance, but in bones and teeth. However, some dogs are much more different than others. For example, a husky is going to be much more similar to the ancient gray wolf than a pug is, because a pug has changed even more than a husky has. This is because they are not changing and evolving based off of natural selection, is based off of artificial selection. They are not changing based off of what will help them to survive better, but what humans want from them. This can lead to health issues when it is taken too far. Dogs are not only different from the ancient wolves that they descend from, but also from the very first dogs of their breed. Dogs are bred for specific purposes and jobs, and their body and temperament are generally tailored to that still. This is why many working dogs end up in shelters, because they need the physical and mental stimulation or they become destructive. When they don't get that, their family then rehomes them and they end up in shelters many times throughout their life. Although these dogs still have many of the original traits that they were bred for, some dogs have changed a lot. For example, a lab, although it was originally bred for the job of retrieving during hunting, they can now live an entirely fulfilled life as a family dog, simply playing fetch. Many dogs are becoming overbred, causing health issues. This is because a lot of times the breeders do not take the well-being of the dog into consideration. This is how we ended up with dogs like pugs and bulldogs, which have such far shortened snouts that they can barely breathe. We've also seen a recent change where we are seeing more mixed breeds and mutts. This broadens the gene pool of the offspring and allows for less likelihood of things like the common hipodysplasia found in German Shepherds. It can also reverse some of the poor breeding that we see in pugs. I am sure that now you can see not only the changes that we have seen in the dogs themselves, but also in the breeding practices. We've talked about the changes from the earliest of domestication to current breeding practices. I hope that you leave feeling more informed and find this topic as interesting as I did. I also hope that maybe you can even implement this into your own lives.